I wasn't ready. I repeated it to myself as I stood outside courtroom 4B, my fingers trembling around a letter Elijah had slipped under my door the night before. On the other side of that thick wooden door, lawyers argued as if my entire life, and his, could be reduced to case files and exhibits. My son would be asked to choose between the woman who gave him life and the woman who had raised him through every sleepless night. 17 years earlier. I never imagined such a day could come. I never imagined that a single sound would lead me to him. And that sound would change the rest of my life. It was a freezing January night in Hyde Park, Chicago. I had just finished grading essays from my students and was walking down the hallway of my old brick apartment building. The silence unsettled me until I heard it, faint and uneven, a broken sob hidden between shallow breaths. My steps quickened toward the stairwell where the sound grew sharper. There, in the shadows, sat a wicker basket wrapped in a thin coat damp from the frost. My heart began to pound as I crouched, and then I saw him tiny, red-faced, his lips moving without sound, too weak even to cry. He was wrapped in a hospital blanket, a folded scrap of paper tucked to the side. 5 words, written in hurried script, "Please take care of him." My hands shook as I dialed 911, but even before the call connected, I lifted the baby into my arms, his warmth pressed against me, fragile yet insistent. I didn't know it then, but in that moment, I had already begun to love him. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though to me it felt like hours. The paramedics carried him to safety, but I held on to his hand until they gently pried it from mine. That dark hallway had been the end for someone else, but for me, it was the beginning of everything. At the hospital, nurses referred to him clinically as Baby January, a placeholder name meant for records, but I couldn't bear that coldness. By the next morning, I had already whispered the name Elijah against his tiny cheek. Elijah, my gift from God. A social worker told me the state would place him in temporary custody until a guardian was appointed. My lips spoke before reason could stop me. I want him. I want to adopt him. The woman raised her brows, listing requirements, financial stability, a home, evaluations. I nodded, though I had little of it. I was single, living in a 1-bedroom apartment above an antique bookstore, with barely enough savings to cover rent. Yet I told her what I knew was true. What I have is enough, and I will give him my life. The process was grueling. Inspections, interviews, endless papers. I sold my father's guitar to buy him a crib, worked late tutoring sessions, stretched every dollar. Family questioned me, friends doubted me, but none of them had heard that desperate cry in the night. In March, the state finally allowed me to take him home. He was only 3 weeks old. That night, I rocked him until dawn, whispering stories about stars and second chances. I was 31 years old. He was just a baby, and somehow we had saved each other. Our life together was never easy. My tiny apartment had thin walls and icy windows. Some nights, dinner was only soup stretched too thin for the 2 of us. Yet within those walls lived laughter, bedtime stories, and the scent of cocoa. We couldn't afford vacations, so instead, Elijah and I collected postcards from the library, pinning them on a map with promises that one day we would see those places together. Every January 12th, we lit a single candle to honor the night I found him, and I whispered, "Today was the day I met you." He would listen in silence, his small hand wrapped around mine, and I felt chosen in a way I never had before. When Elijah was 8, I told him the truth. We sat on a park bench, ducks gathering by the water as I confessed that he hadn't been born to me, that someone had left him in a basket, and that from that night forward, he became my world. He didn't answer right away, just tossed a stone into the water and watched the ripples. Then he reached for my hand and said, "I still choose you." I broke into tears of gratitude, knowing that blood may write one story, but love writes the book. As Elijah grew older, his gift for art revealed itself. He filled notebooks with drawings, faces of neighbors, strangers on buses, fantastical creatures. Art became his refuge, and I encouraged it even when money was tight. He won his first competition at 13 with a drawing that stunned the judges. I clapped until my palms stung, saving that drawing as if it were gold. Later, he told me he wanted to attend an art school in Portland, Oregon. I hid my fear of distance and told him I would help him get there, no matter what it took. It was natural for a son to grow his own wings, but I didn't know that soon. His past, the past I thought had been buried, would come knocking. One winter morning, I found a note Elijah had left on the kitchen table. "I love you. Please don't hate me for wanting to know where I come from." My chest tightened. I had always promised him the choice would be his, but I never imagined he would open that door without me. Days later, I met her, the woman who claimed to be his mother. She stepped out of a black car in a red coat, immaculate, confident. Her name was Vanessa Sterling. She carried a folder stamped with the seal of a law firm. Her voice was calm as she told me who she was. "I believe you've been raising my son." The grocery bags nearly slipped from my hands. I led her inside, though my kitchen felt suddenly invaded. She sat across from me at the worn Formica table, placing that law firm folder between us like a silent weapon. Her tone was polite, but beneath every word was a sharp edge. She explained that she had been only 18 when Elijah was born, addicted, living on the streets. Leaving him, she claimed, was an act of mercy. "But now," she said evenly, "I am sober, rebuilt, and ready to be his mother again." I stared at her, anger rising in my chest. Where were you 17 years ago when he cried alone in the dark? You left no name, no phone number, just a note asking someone else to clean up the mess. She didn't flinch. "And you did. You did it well. But he's still mine." Then she slid the DNA results toward me. The paper confirmed what she said, though I hardly needed the test. The way she declared mine told me she believed it. Before leaving, she delivered one last blow. "Elijah contacted me weeks ago. He was afraid to hurt you, but he already knows. We've spoken. It's only a matter of time." When the door closed, I sat in silence, the kitchen clock ticking too loudly. My son's room smelled of paint and shampoo, but it felt emptier than ever. On his desk lay a sketchbook. The final page showed 2 women drawn from fractured mirrors, one sharply defined, the other blurred. In the corner, one word was scrawled, "divide." That night, I couldn't cry. I simply lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if motherhood could truly be undone by biology. The following weeks, Elijah moved between us like a restless tide. He spent time with Vanessa, who whisked him to the coast, who told him stories of her youth on the sand with a guitar. He returned home sunburned and contemplative, whispering to himself, "I have her nose." I wanted to tell him, "No, you have your own face, shaped by the life we built together." But I swallowed the words, terrified that forbidding him would only push him farther. Instead, I cooked meals that went untouched, cleaned shelves already spotless, and smiled when my heart ached. Then came Vanessa's invitation for dinner downtown. Elijah begged me to go, hope flickering in his eyes, so I wore the blue dress he had once given me and sat with them beneath glittering chandeliers. At first, conversation flowed politely, his scholarship opportunities, his art, his future. But beneath the silverware clinking, I felt the unspoken question throb, to whom does he belong? Elijah sensed it too. His fork stilled, his eyes darted between us, and then, in a trembling voice, he said, "I don't want to lose either of you, but if I have to choose, I choose the one who stayed." The restaurant fell into silence. My breath broke, my heart cracked open, and Vanessa lowered her eyes. I squeezed my son's hand beneath the table, words trapped in my throat. I wanted to shout in triumph, yet all I felt was fragile gratitude. That night, I lay awake replaying his sentence, as if etching it into my bones. Still, the calm did not last. A manila envelope soon arrived. Vanessa had filed for custody review, armed with lawyers and documents. The day of the hearing dawned with heavy fog. I dressed carefully in a navy blouse and my mother's pearl earrings, as if wearing armor made of memory. Vanessa arrived with polished attorneys, their suits gleaming, their arguments rehearsed. I had only a folder of photographs, report cards, and Elijah's drawings, evidence not of wealth, but of life lived together. The judge, weary-eyed, opened the case. Words like biological mother and legal guardian filled the room. But the word mother itself hung unsaid, belonging to neither side. Her lawyers painted a picture of redemption, of blood ties and heritage. They said Elijah deserved his legacy. They insinuated that with me, he might be limited. For a moment, I nearly laughed at the absurdity. 17 years of fevers, tears, homework, bedtime stories, reduced to limits. When my turn came, I rose with shaking hands and spoke from my core. I'm not here to argue biology or deny her recovery. 17 years ago, I found a baby in a hallway with nothing but a note. I gave him a childhood. I soothed his storms, forgave his mistakes, taught him how to tie a tie, and how to be unafraid of saying he was scared. I didn't give him life, but I gave him every day of living. Isn't that what being a mother is? The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked up. Her pen paused mid-air. For the first time, I felt that my truth had cut through their rehearsed arguments. The decision wouldn't be made immediately, but I knew a seed had been planted that love might weigh heavier than blood. When Elijah and I walked out into the thinning fog, he placed his hand on mine and whispered again, "Mama, if I have to choose, I choose the one who stayed." This time, the words didn't just crack my fear, they began to mend it. The weeks after the hearing crawled by, every day a measure of doubt. I tried to live as if decisions were not looming grading essays at the kitchen table. Setting 2 plates, even when Elijah texted that he would eat out, leaving the living room lamp on until 11 the way he liked it. When the ruling finally came, it arrived as 2 stapled pages that shook in my hands before I even read them. The judge's order named me the primary legal guardian. Vanessa would have scheduled supervised visitation and the right to calls at reasonable hours. It was not triumph. It was a fragile boundary line drawn across 17 years of devotion and a late claim of blood. I sat in the quiet, the refrigerator humming, and let myself breathe for the first time in months. Elijah came home from school around 4:15 p.m., the winter air riding in on his jacket. I handed him the papers without words, and he read quickly, his eyes scanning for what mattered and skimming what didn't. He wrapped his arms around me in that sudden, earnest way he had never outgrown, and I felt his breath steady against my shoulder. "I'm still here," he murmured. That evening, we ate reheated chili and laughed, not at anything funny, but at relief itself. Later, he disappeared into his room, and I found him an hour after 10:00 p.m., sitting on the floor among open sketchbooks, drawing two hands clasped over a table. Underneath, with deliberate strokes, he wrote, "The one who stayed." Spring arrived, and with it, letters stamped with university seals and glossy trifold brochures promising studios, mentors, and futures. He had applied to several art programs, but the one that set his heart on fire was in Portland, Oregon. The acceptance, when it arrived, came with the words "full scholarship," and for a moment I forgot how to stand. I sank onto the kitchen chair, the linoleum cool beneath my bare feet, while Elijah knelt and pressed his head to my lap like a child. I thought of the cardboard fireplace he had drawn when we had no heat, the dragons that had become portraits, the boy who chose me on a park bench. "You did this," I whispered, "with your hands and your stubborn joy. You did this." We spent the summer preparing. I learned the names of brushes and papers and fixatives, folded shirts that smelled like rain and graphite, labeled boxes in my neat teacher's scrawl. On weekends, we made lists and then remade them, laughter and melancholy mixing like two colors we could not fully separate. Vanessa kept to the parameters of the court order. She took him to coffee shops and galleries and asked him about classes. I kept my distance, honoring the fence the judge had built. Once, when he came home around 6:30 p.m., he set a photograph on the table Vanessa at the ocean as a teenager. Hair loose in the wind, a guitar slung across her shoulder. "It's a fine photo," I said, and it was. Later, as I washed dishes, I admitted to myself that love could be a wide table, and perhaps we were all just learning how to sit there without knocking over the glasses. The morning we left for Portland, the hallway smelled faintly of floor wax and coffee from the downstairs cafe. Elijah's room stood nearly bare, small squares of lighter paint where drawings had once hung in careful rows. He checked the closet twice, and then a third time, the habit of a boy who had learned to be responsible for his own world. At 8:10 a.m., we carried suitcases down the stairs and loaded them into the rideshare, the city just waking delivery trucks, dog walkers, a bus groaning at the corner. On the curb, he hugged me for a long time, longer than departures usually allow. "I'll call when I land," he said, "every Sunday." I replied. The car pulled away, and I stood with my hands stuffed in the pockets of my coat, watching until I could no longer pretend I could see him. The apartment held a new kind of quiet. I found solace in small rituals. At 7:00 a.m., I brewed coffee and set it in the cup he liked even though he was not there to drink it. At 9:15 p.m., I switched on the lamp in the living room, then off again, as if acknowledging the span of a day was a way to honor his absence. His first call came from a dorm room where the window framed a slice of gray sky. He sounded breathless and tired and alive. He told me about a professor who carried a pocket notebook and quoted painters as if they were saints. About a girl who painted cityscapes with knives instead of brushes. About the smell of turpentine that clung to the halls. "Send me a picture of your desk," I said, and he did pencils in a jar. A taped photograph of the two of us at the park with the ducks. Soon, envelopes began to appear each week. The paper soft from his hands. A charcoal study of a bus driver's face, every wrinkle mapped with tenderness. A watercolor of a coffee shop where the steam lifted like prayer. I framed the first sketch he sent the view from his window. Roofs and sky solved in quick strokes, and set it on my nightstand like a quiet lighthouse. One afternoon at 3:40 p.m., an envelope held a painting that took my breath away. Under a tree heavy with leaves sat two women, one with reddish hair, one with a tired expression softened by a steady smile. In careful ink, he had written, "I belong to the one who stayed." I did not cry first. I sat with it, letting the truth land again like a bird that trusted the branch. Then the tears came, clean and grateful. Time, once measured by fevers and field trips, was measured now by studio critiques and late-night calls. Vanessa abided by the court's order, her visits becoming phone conversations that had the shape of curiosity rather than claim. I began to believe we had all found a way to hold the same boy without tearing him in two. Then the phone rang on a gray afternoon when the trees outside the window were the color of old coins. The number was unfamiliar. A nurse's voice, professional and kind, told me that Vanessa was in the hospital, her liver failing, her body finally demanding payment for old debts she had tried to outrun. "Your son is listed as her contact," the nurse said. "He's here." By the time I reached the hospital, the corridors smelled of antiseptic and something heavier. Elijah stood outside a room with his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, the posture of a boy trying to hold more than he could say. He looked up when he saw me, eyes red, jaw tight. "She asked for you," he said quietly. "Not to come in. Just to know." I touched his shoulder, the simple gesture that had always steadied us both. We sat in plastic chairs and watched the clock lurch toward 6 narrow hours. Each minute an uneven step down a hallway neither of us had chosen. When the doctor finally emerged, his voice was gentle. Elijah nodded and pressed his face into his palms. I did what I had always done since the night I found him. I stayed. Elijah stayed by Vanessa's side in those last days, and though I never entered the room, I knew what it meant to him. He had questions only she could answer, and forgiveness only he could grant. When the call finally came, his voice was raw, heavy with a grief that belonged to both of them. "She's gone. Mama, come get me." I drove through the rain, headlights carving lines across wet pavement, and when I reached him outside the hospital, I said nothing. We rode home in silence, the kind of silence that holds more than words could ever manage. Weeks later, he appeared in the kitchen with a cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. "This is from her," he said softly. "She wanted you to have it." Inside were fragments of a life photographs of a girl with a guitar and wind-tangled hair, hospital bracelets, and at the very bottom, the note I had found with him 17 years earlier. "Please take care of him." My throat tightened as if those words were being spoken again. Beneath the note lay a worn leather journal. Elijah placed it in my hands and then left me alone. The journal was written in hurried scrawl, with whole paragraphs scratched out and rewritten. Page after page told of addiction, of cold nights under bridges, of hunger and fear. But woven through the darkness was a thread of longing, a baby she could not raise, a hope that someone, somewhere, might love him the way she wished she could. In one entry, written in larger, trembling letters, she described leaving him in that hallway as both her destruction and her salvation. In another, she called me the unknown miracle. I closed the journal with tears staining my cheeks, understanding for the first time that our lives had crossed not by accident, but through the desperate prayer of a girl who had nothing left to give. Time moved on, and Elijah built his own life. He graduated, his name called out in a hall filled with applause, his hands paint-stained even on that polished stage. He became an illustrator, his work finding homes in children's books, on city murals, in workshops where he guided small hands to find colors for their own stories. Every weekend, he volunteered with children in foster care, teaching them to draw, to imagine, to believe they could create worlds even when their real one felt uncertain. It makes me feel like I'm giving back some of what I received, he told me once. And I knew that the cycle had completed itself in a way neither Vanessa nor I could have planned. I watched him transform pain into beauty, absence into presence. I watched him teach children who, like him once, didn't know where they belonged. And I saw in their faces the same spark I had seen in his when he first picked up a crayon and turned cardboard into fire. Pride became the quiet rhythm of my days, a pulse beneath everything I did. Now, when people ask me if I have children, I smile. Yes, I say, I have one son. He's an artist. He teaches. He loves deeply. No one asks about DNA, or bloodlines, or court cases. And even if they did, I wouldn't need to explain. Because what I learned, what I lived, is that motherhood isn't measured by blood or by law, but by presence. It's built in the invisible, the nights awake with fever, the small lunches packed in haste, the advice whispered in a car on the way to school. Motherhood is staying when it would be easier to walk away. It is choosing again and again, every day. 17 years ago, I found a baby in a basket under a stairwell. Today, I look at the man he has become, and I know that the story of us was written not by fate alone, but by choice, by love, by staying, and if there is one lesson my life offers, it is this: we are not bound only by the blood we inherit, but by the loyalty we give, the sacrifices we make, and the love we choose to keep. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe so I can continue bringing you more heartfelt life stories. And don't forget to check out the next stories waiting for you on the screen right now. With love and gratitude. See you in the next video.